Welcome to Shattering Glass In Heels. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend Lea Eriksen, one of the original members of the Council of Queens, the Director of Technology and Innovation, and CIO for the city of Long Beach, California. Hey, Lea.
Hi, Christine.
Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. I'm super excited to dive a little bit deeper with you and talk. So give everyone context about how you and I know each other. We met 20-something years ago at the YWCA in Cincinnati. I think we were both part of the Rising Star program. And wonderfully enough, you and I have both moved to different cities, but have just kept in touch and find ourselves, next door neighbors in California, which is super fun. So, and just really just excited to have you in the podcast and just really just talk a little bit about your journey. So, CIO for the city of Long Beach, woman in technology. We are a rare breed. Talk to us a little bit about kind of your journey. How did you, jump into the technology space, and what were some of the challenges that led you, along the path as well?
Yeah, well, first, Christine, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And yeah, so for me, I'm a little different than what you described in your book. I've never been in corporate America, but I am a woman in technology. But I didn't start out that way. I've actually had a 25-year career in local government, and always was interested in technology, but worked in other areas, especially budget and finance. And when I got recruited to come to the city of Long Beach about 10 years ago, I was actually serving as the budget director in Cincinnati, and I did the similar role in Long Beach. So fast forward 4 years later, and the city of Long Beach needed someone to step in to be the interim director of technology and innovation department. And they wanted someone who was a people-focused leader. They wanted someone who understood the city's challenges and who was, viewed as a problem-solving partner to the city department. And I had a leadership role on our ERP project, so I was very familiar with the largest technology project that the city was facing. And so they needed someone kind of immediately to jump into that role, and I said yes. But I fully intended to go back into budget and finance and didn't see myself as a technologist at the time. But what I learned when I got into that director and CIO role was, in fact, early on, I didn't even call myself CIO. I was like, oh, I'm just the director of technology and innovation, an interim director of technology and innovation. But I really found that basically I could do the job. I was doing the job. It really was focused on people, being a people-focused leader, problem solving, being able to ask great questions and really build and retain a great team. Those were like more important facts than having a deep technology background, especially since you really can't know everything about technology. It is evolving so fast. There's just so many different areas, in technology to know. So, and I also found that my path to CIO was non-traditional, but it wasn't totally unusual, since budget and finance tend to be areas or financial roles. Sometimes technology ends up being in financial roles. So I was in the role interim for 6 months, and even though I was doing the job, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. So I was concerned about, am I really going to be the CIO for the city of Long Beach? And another female leader in the city gave me a pep talk and said, "Are you crazy? You're doing the job. Why are you, having any doubts?" And so she encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring. And what I did, and what was one funny story was, I had actually told my boss at the time, I've decided to apply for the permanent position. And he said, "Great, we're happy to hear that." And and he was the city manager, by the way, which is like the CEO of a corporation. And I said, "Well, I'm the right candidate at the right time." And he's like, "Yes, great." And then I said, "You'd be insane not to hire me." And he was like, "Whoa." And then I felt like, did I go too far? But why I had that confidence is like, once I realized, that this was the right role for me, I knew that I was the right leader to lead the department through what was we were going through at that time, which was two like huge projects, the ERP as well as building a new city hall and a new data center. So that was I feel like I skipped a lot in my background, about leadership and the path leadership, but that's how I got into technology. But in some of my earlier roles, I was in economic development, for example, the city of Cincinnati. And then that's a world with corporate real estate brokers and bankers and developers and big corporations wanting tax deals. And so, I was in those roles and settings where I often found myself, as the only woman in the room. And along my path, um, I actually very much benefited from having mentors that were male. In fact, until recently, all my bosses or my direct bosses were men. I've never had a female direct boss, and that the path to leadership for me was really helped by men who believed in me, and I think you call them in your book men of quality. But
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I benefited from men of quality who believed in me, but also a few well-placed women who served as sponsors. Even just my story about the Rising Star program involves, a female sponsor. But um, yeah, I, and also that other director that I mentioned earlier who convinced me to apply for the permanent job as a director. So definitely women have influenced me in my career, but I've been, definitely. Not benefited from the men of quality in my life as well.
No, I think that's a really great story, right? Because I think for me as well, right? Although I've had some really good female mentors and sponsors, and I talk a lot of, Kathy from the Y and had that exposure at the YWCA, which was such a special thing to have, like, at the early onset of our careers, to have that access to really successful women so that you can kind of see yourself, your future self in one of them, but then also to build that community around us as the rising stars. And you and I have known each other for 20 something years, and we've got other friends that, we're part of that. And we've developed this like really strong sisterhood, which I call the Council of Queens. It's awesome, right? But that's, but when you start to really take that away and go into industry, and I would say government and even technology are probably not the most female dominated industries as well. And for me, going into financial services, it is the men. Majority of my sponsors and mentors have been men. And I talk about the men of quality in my life because it's super important that, in order for us to change the makeup of what it looks like in the executive leadership makeup, to have someone that looks like you or me there, we need to get that sponsorship for men. They need to be part of that conversation, and we need to have them pounding the table for us in order for it to change. And so, I think that story is not unusual, and hopefully, that changes a little bit in the next narrative, right? Where it's us now on the top and other women where that we can, as women, now a responsibility to lift as we climb this, as we always say at the Y too. So that we can also pound the table for other women. So hopefully that changes as well. Since majority of the people that you've dealt with men, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, right? I could just imagine that you're either the one or one of the few. Was it really hard? Did you have moments where you really got into bad competitive situations with other women who may be, aiming for the same type of lift in the areas that you were looking at in your career?
So I was thinking about that kind of question. And well, first off, before I answer that question, I wanted to point out that when women gained the right to vote, guess who voted on that amendment? Men. So
Right.
men are definitely part of the equation, part of solving and being supportive. But yeah, to answer your question about in my career, mostly I've been kind of pulled into leadership positions by men who believed in me and saw my potential. But I was thinking about it, I generally wasn't competing with other women, but then I thought about a story of another woman who's a little bit of an older leader in another department back in the city of Cincinnati. And one of the things I loved about her is she's very frank and she was very like honest. And so even I never saw her as a rival. We weren't competing for the same roles, but she would tell me her opinions. And her opinion was that people need to do the time. Like people need to put in the time before they can get a certain role. And it occurred to me that that mindset that she had probably was impacting, potential other up and coming female leaders in the organization. Because if you think about it, like especially early on in careers, you were like women were the only ones. It was really hard to get to those top positions, or hard, and they still are. We're still not 50-50 here, but it was even harder back then. And so people, we had more barriers. We overcame them, and we got to where we wanted to get to. And then instead of lifting as we climbed, potentially some women can say, well, hey, this is what I had to go through. I'm going to pull the ladder up. You have to climb the same wall that I did and jump over this hurdle, like I did, because I had to do that. And that's not my philosophy. That's not the way I viewed it, and that's definitely not the philosophy of the Council of Queens and the YWCA, lift as we climb. So I've definitely maybe unusual that I haven't had those female rivals, but I definitely know I can see why that can happen in other organizations, for example.
No, I think that's great that you're one of the lucky ones, right? Who don't have the kind of like pain of that female rivalry, which is great. But outside of like, being a woman tech in your career, you're also super involved in the industry itself, like on boards, and are involved in a lot of industry events. Can you like really think about like, just that lens around diversity and representation once you start to thinking about that outside of like the corporations, or essentially
Hmm.
corporations that you work for, and looking at it from an industry lens, or even like from both tech and maybe government, and just also serving in nonprofit boards, which is a big deal for you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after being appointed to the CIO role and looking internally at my organization, I realized, hey, I need to look at the whole world that's out there in tech. It's not just going live with those two big tech projects that we were focused on in 2019. So I joined a couple of local technology organizations that are across sector. So they bring together CIOs and technologists from across industries. And right now I'm actually on the boards of two of those organizations. But about, I think it was roughly 4, maybe 5 years ago, there was an event, and I remember it distinctly. I'm not going to name the organization, but there was an event, and there was a whole day of panels, and pretty much like there was very little people of color on the panels, and there was only one woman on the stage, and she wasn't even on the
Yeah.
panel. She was there to talk about, to talk on behalf of the board I was on. Or at the time I wasn't on the board, but that organization, and to welcome people. And it wasn't me, but like I noticed that, at the time, and she noticed it. And what I'm really proud of is like she took things, into her own hands, and she got together with a bunch of other CIOs, and she said, hey, I'm creating a speakers bureau, a list of women CIO speakers, because we don't want this ever to happen again, for these types of events, because it's important. Representation matters, seeing people, especially with all the technologists in the rooms, hearing from female or people, people of color, CIOs, that's really important. And so I said, sure, sign me up. Of course, now I feel pressure not to say no anytime I'm asked to speak. But yeah, because if they're asking me to speak, that's important, to do that. But yeah, and I'm really proud of both the organizations I'm on the boards of, because it's really, we're thoughtful and we're intentional about that, not only on the board leadership level, but also on those events, and it hasn't happened like that again. We've had much better results.
Yeah. I think there's a quote from Billie Jean King that sits in the Arthur Ashe Stadium. Sometimes a Panther in the U.S. Open says, "Pressure is the price of privilege." Um, I love it so much. Yeah, it is the price of privilege, and I love it so much because I think you and I, and so many of the women that we've had the exposure to, essentially like had to break glass first, right? To just being one of the first to like sign up and put your hand up there, to put yourself out there, to show that representation, to really kind of pound the pavement, to really change the narrative, right? So that that there is that representation. How much of that do you feel, that kind of pressure of having to kind of lift as you climb and really change that narrative? Obviously, like we both grow up from a fabric and a cloth, coming from the why, that's really kind of a big focus and something that's really important to us. But as you start to think about like your own organization and the industry in general, like how much more do we have to do? What can we continue to do to pound the pavement, to have that representation, and just be better?
Yeah, we all play a role in being better. And like I said, there was pressure to not say no when I'm asked to speak. But then it occurred to me, and I read this somewhere. If you don't want to say yes, find someone else. Like, in fact, that's actually part of allyship, is like find someone else who you can nominate to speak. That would be, like splendid and need that exposure. And so, I'm now to that point, where I'm starting to think about who can I don't want to say no, but I want to say, well, have you thought about this person? And so, and I think that's another way of lifting as we climb, and making and allyship and advocating is to not just think about ourselves, but to think about other strong women leaders who would like that opportunity to speak at an event. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I've done some of that in the past. One thing I was also going to mention about pressure is, I feel like there's like a standard where you can't make a mistake. Like if you're a female or a person of color, like you have even more pressure, to go up there. And
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I'm not the most polished speaker. I'm a more authentic speaker. And so I go up there and I do my best. And generally, like what I find is that, you know, I do well. I obviously keep getting asked to speak at events, but at the same time, there is more pressure when you're up there, because if you feel like if you make a mistake or stumble over words or like go blank, it there's more judgment. That, and then you feel like
Yeah.
you let the whole gender of women down as opposed to just, I just put myself down. So I don't know if there's a little bit of that pressure too.
Yeah. I don't know how you like kind of turn that off, but for me it's just like I kind of know that I'm just gonna do my best, and I just go for it, and I don't think about. I try to tune out that voice in my head about like how to be perfect, how to kind of deliver that perfect, and just try and go for it. But I know that a lot of women and other people, that's definitely not their path, and there's always that voice in your head that's driving you to like don't mess up, be perfect, or even in so many ways, like you can even call it like that imposter syndrome, right? Like
Hmm.
like like why do I really deserve to be here and in front of that? And I think it's something you and I've like talked about, like how do we turn that off and how do we be better,
Hmm.
as women, to stop apologizing for that and just really know that we own the right to be at the places that we're at. So I think
Yes,
that
we
that's
do.
something, that's a common theme that I've also seen. Yeah. So um let's talk a little bit about the YWCA. You like, I think it was such a special program, and you and I were talking about this. Like, I don't think I've seen anything kind of replicated similar to that, right? That is so embedded in the community, where you've got the career women of achievement, all these women who are leaders in the city, who are also recognized to be the top of their game, and literally really put into an academy that then is also, there's this parallel organization called the Rising Stars, where they're identifying kind of next people, and the whole really concept of lifting as you climb and creating this community of women, of those who have succeeded and those who are trying on the rise, and kind of benefiting from that. And you and I were part of the Rising Stars program, and we met that way. Can you tell me a little bit about like what was the impact of that for you? I talked a lot about that in the book. I mean, for me, it was, I met Kathy Beecham through that. I met the Council of Queens of that, and so many of my relationships and that have been important to me, my growth as a person and my professional career, have been part of that. But what was that for you? What was that experience for you at the Y?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was the first time anyone even looked at me or called me a rising star or a leader. And so this was in my case, I was nominated by the city manager, who is a female city manager, and she I was one of a team member, an individual contributor in her office, and she saw potential in me, and so she nominated me for this program, and I got in. And the exposure to my fellow rising stars, as well as to the career women of achievement, and it was such a great organization and such great exposure and learnings. Like one of the things I've learned too is like the work of leadership, doesn't really rely on titles. Like anyone can be a leader, regardless of your title. And so the soft skills and other types of trainings that I got exposed to, panel discussions, as part of that program, was really helpful to me, to even start to see myself as a leader. And that also led me to being nominated for 40 Under 40 award, which was a whole nother program, in Cincinnati. And 2 years later was when I got tapped to be my first leadership role, in which at the time I was, 30 years old, being at that time the interim director of the budget office, and that was a pretty big role. And people had a lot of confidence in me, to do that. And I feel like the learnings in the network that I was gaining gave me that confidence to step into that role. And the relationships that I've built, with women I would normally never have interacted with otherwise, it was so great, across industry sectors and everything, in all different ages as well.
No, that's really great. One of the topics that you and I talked about a lot, like I think we discussed a lot in the why, and I think it's this whole topic that you and I continue to evolve, like in different phases of our life, is this concept of work-life balance. And I love the fact that like we were in this one session, you brought up the question around work-life balance, and um, I just want to throw that out to you, right? It's like, how do you achieve work-life balance? What do you think about like work-life balance now that we're, in these
Yeah.
leadership positions? And, yeah, I'll let you tell the story and, go ahead.
Yeah, so I distinctly remember that session where there was three powerful female leaders of university and big international corporations. And what I was disappointed to hear was they were talking about, how you really couldn't have work-life balance. That there's kind of this myth like that, that can actually happen, and that you really do have to sacrifice if you're going to get to their level, and that potentially those sacrifices could be things like family, whether it's like family of creation or your family of origin. I'm very, very close to my family of origin. And, I don't know if your listeners or your viewers can see the picture behind me, but that's me and my twin sister, back there at our high school graduation. And my, one of the things that's really important to me is my family of origin, because my twin sister tragically had passed away from cancer when we were 27. And right around the time, about a year later is when I was joined the Rising Star program. And I knew my twin sister had taken a promotion and she had made some sacrifices, and she regretted that in her life, that she was saying no to things. And I had made this commitment to myself after having those conversations with her as she was ill, that like I wasn't going to do that. I was going to work hard while I was at work, but I was going to prioritize my family and my personal life. So I was so disheartened, listening to these female leaders say you can't have it all. So I asked the question, I said, well, hey, why can't we shape the organizations as more and more female leaders, take these roles? Can't we change our workplaces so we can prioritize work-life balance? That you can be successful if you just put in your 40 hours. And now these days we work from home. It can be successful, for example, and still be able to, balance all the personal needs. Um, but I asked that question and I was hopeful for a great answer. And the answer was, well, we compete in a global economy. Even if we try to do that, the rest of the country, the rest of the world will stay really productive. And there was this assumption that if you have work-life balance, you can't be productive, or you can't be successful.
Right.
And so I was kind of disheartened, by that. But one of the other things that kind of came from that moment was I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the female leader that can cultivate and nurture an organization. I'm going to prove that we can do this, and here I am years later, and I prioritize work-life balance for myself and for my team. And, we talk about how important it is. And I do think that's a recipe for productivity. Like you
Yeah.
need to have breaks, you need to have time away from the office. You're not going to be your best. And if you're working for an organization who doesn't care about you, and you're dealing with an elderly family member or a child, and you're in kind of
Yeah.
crisis, and they don't care about you, and they're like, I don't care, get your work done. How loyal are you going to be? You're not going to be loyal. But if you work for someone who cares for you and they have your back, and then when you get through that crisis, you come back to work and you work twice as hard because you know that your organization cares, and I care. So that's what I think about work-life balance.
I love that. I love that you shared this story because, I talked a little about this, and I love that it shaped you in a different way. You're just like, you know what? I'm going to be that leader who's going to change that. To say that you can't have it all, because I went the opposite way, which just basically was, to me, like, I think sitting in that moment, it confirmed to me all the things that I was already told, that you can't have it all, that you have to choose, that there's some things in your life that's just really going to suffer, right? You can't be a wife and a mother and all that kind of stuff. And then coming from a performing arts background, that was also like equally amplified because it's about your body and the time away and all this stuff to try to get back in your game. Like you would have to pick, right, strategically around that. And so I think, different paths, two people in the same room hearing the same message kind of went down different ways. Cause like, I think for the longest time for me, what I did was I made the choice, right? I have two divorces in, my relationships did suffer, and it was kind of like, okay, yeah, it's a choice that I made. But, when then I ended up hyper focusing on the career, right? I wanted this so badly. I wanted the success so badly that I almost went down the extreme of like, okay, I'm going to live my life to work. And it wasn't until like COVID and me dying from COVID and I'm in the hospital and I'm like, great, I'm alone, you know, and and no one could really advocate for me. I didn't have didn't have any of the paperwork to do, like to have even my best friend be able to check in on me, right? Because I was single, I'm married, so there wasn't a default to that. But I'm getting text messages on my phone and people are asking me about a deck, an unfinished deck. And I'm like, gosh, really? Is this like the shape of my life, that I may be dying and like, people are asking me about a deck? Like kind of like the extreme to your point, I think you had experienced that a little bit earlier in your life with your sister, the loss of your sister. Now I'm experiencing this towards the later part of my life and thinking, oh my God, I'm dying alone. And I don't ever want to, and what was my team going to say? Like she did not finish the deck that she was supposed to deliver. And it was a really moment for me where it was like I had to reevaluate my life and some of the transformation that I've had in the last couple of years. And I also talk about in the book, and I've shared with you, where I really had to really rethink what, that looks like, right? But I don't think the answer is life work balance, right? I think I've talked to a lot of women about like, well, what does that really life work balance mean? And I think a lot of people just really told me, a lot of successful women and executive women said, just toss that definition out the door, because I think you're going to set yourself up for failure to think about life work balance in this dimension. Like, just think about it as, what it is to just live your life and live your life with purpose. And I think that's essentially what I come back with, is like, I just live my life with purpose, that everything that I do on a daily basis, whether it's my job or the people that I interact with, I just know that I'm going to wake up every day and just ask and want to show up as my best self, and come in with, being able to make an impact to that person or to that job and the career on my day-to-day basis. And I feel like living my life with that kind of purpose and changing my mindset allows me, like, I don't have this like cool thing around, oh my God, there's a dimension of work versus life. It just, there's a fluidity about it that allows me also just to come into my authentic self. So, but thank you for sharing that, because it's like, those are things I just never really thought about. But yeah, that I was in the other extreme where it's like, wow, gosh, if this is what it's going to take, and I don't have a choice. And that was the path that I made. But it catches up with you and of course corrects after a little bit. So,
Definitely. Well, that was a beautiful,
but
you know,
yeah.
I was going to say, like, that's a beautiful story that you just shared, Christine, about living with passion and purpose, and I think for me, working in government is helpful through that because I realize the impact I have on my community, and it feels, very much fulfilling and rewarding to me. One thing I was going to say about the term work-life balance, I heard this other term that I like better. It's called work-life blend. And, work-life blend, isn't necessarily balanced. Sometimes it just, you want to incorporate both. And you have those moments, where you pick work and there's moments where you pick your life, the family. And, and over time, they completely, when you put them all together, you have a satisfying and fulfilling life without too much sacrifice.
Yeah. But also just like Lea, just thank you for being one of those leaders, right, that do care about people and the time and leading with that example and like really having that empathy and understanding because not a lot of executive leaders have that kind of empathy and understanding with other people within their organization to not question why they're having the time off or whether it's a reason where they're taking vacation but having that flexibility that is a rare trait in a lot I mean whether you're in government or corporate America, lots of times like people feel guilty about taking time off or, feel like, that like I think Americans more than the Europeans. My Europeans like when they're gone, they're gone. But like there is a little bit of the kind of like that guilt or just that inability to feel like they can take time off and have the other person really understand, that that taking time off is or taking the breaks that you need. Whether it's just like honestly, like there's nothing wrong with saying that you're taking care of yourself, but there's
Oh,
a lot of kind of stigma around that.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I definitely try to lead by example. And lest people think that I don't care about productivity or purpose, I totally do. Like my department is very hardworking. My team is very hardworking. We're very much focused on doing, wonderful things for the city of Long Beach. But I'm being smart about it. I do truly care about my
Yeah.
team members and my employees but I also know that if they take care of themselves, like if they actually take a day off when they're sick early on, they're going to get better much quicker and they're going to be more productive. If they, like I said earlier, if they, are allowed to deal with a family crisis and not feel guilty about it, they're going to come back and they're going to be that much more productive. Like I'm being strategically smart about this too. It's not just warm and fuzzy. I like it really, I
Yeah.
feel like we have much more impressive results having this workplace, that, culture that I'm creating than like if you really look at like, where's this deck, Christine,
Yeah.
when you're in the hospital dying of COVID, like that type of workplace isn't going to really and have as much impact or results.
I don't know if it's a California thing, but that's definitely kind of like I feel like there's a New York Christine and the California Christine. And the New York Christine was, I think New York in general is like go, 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 go. Very ambitious mentality, right, of what that is. And I think for so long it was like the grind. There was something about the grind that I was just like, kind of there's somewhat addicting as well of an energy, but that was always it was always about the grind, right? In New York. And it's not sustainable. First of all, like I'll be the first one to say that. But when I moved to California and coming here and visiting here and doing business in California, very very different. Like I'm sleeping better. Like people want to go out and work out and are very health conscious, go for walks on the beach. Those are some of the things that I said. And honestly, like it's kind of like reverse. It's like you're right. It's not that I'm like working smarter, but I actually show up as my best self
Hmm.
when I take care of myself, when I have those moments for myself, and which is kind of like me also encouraging people like, yeah, put those moments for yourself. Carve out the time, protect your calendar, protect your schedule, protect the things around spending time with your loved ones, etc., and giving time for yourself because that actually allows you to show up better. And when you show up at your best, then productivity is even better than if I look back at my younger self, I'm like showing up because I pulled an all nighter, or had like maxed out my hours to just really kind of like in the grind or just like taking on so much because, of like feeling that was the path to success of taking that on and driving that ambition. And so I don't know if it's a California thing or not, but it's a lot different, but I really kind of appreciate that lesson and just some of the things that I've learned from you that have also benefited me into really tweaking and thinking about, how do I show up as my best self. So, cool. I think we're towards the end of our time here. As like people are watching and listening to this, what advice would you give to like the next generation who are looking at careers in technology or even in government, and kind of navigating through that, and kind of just whether it's like other younger women, etc. What advice do you have to give?
Yeah, well, first of
Yeah.
all, be confident, and even if you don't have the confidence, fake it till you make it. But yeah, like um find people who can be allies and who can help you, and can be sounding boards, because that is so supportive. No one has to do this alone. And in the terms of, in technology, there are organizations, that do have events and other things that you can get exposed to and meet people. In government, I would encourage people to think about and consider government. Government, this is very rewarding. It's to work, especially in the local government, where you're actually working and serving the community, and directly impacting people and the quality of their lives, and so the results that we're our shareholder value is improving the quality of life for our residents, for example. And so government, we have really tricky problems and great things that we're working on, and our technology opportunities are even probably more vast and complex than most companies. Like the city's budget
Yeah.
is $3.2 billion. It's like a large organization, and there's a lot of opportunities. So consider government, and just also be patient, because it takes a while to get into government, with the hiring process. But yeah, but yeah, back to being confident, and finding allies. Yeah, and not, you don't have to go through your career journeys alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for paving the way. And, it's just, representation matters. And, being one of the first and one of the few to shatter that glass ceiling is a really important step. And so thank you. And thank you for just being such a great friend as well, and for jumping on my podcast.
You're welcome,
Gosh,
Christine.
it's just, thank you. And yeah, and for just all of your support. So thank you. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope this has inspired you to continue the fight for equality, challenge stereotypes, and lift as we climb. We'd love to hear from you. Amplify the conversation on social media, following @DuquesseCD. For more information about me and my Amazon best-selling book, Walking in My Shoes, Shattering Glass Ceilings in Corporate America, check out DuquesseCD.com.